Mr. Clark's back. Time to take a look at the Holocaust as we go through it. Please fill out the guided notes that go along with it. Obviously, this is one of the more horrific periods of time in history. And the person that is most attributed to the terrible nature of the Holocaust is Adolf Hitler and his Nazi anti Semitic ideology. So Hitler, he had gained support in the Nazi Party by attacking the Treaty of Versailles. If you remember, the Treaty of Versailles is what really punished the Germans after World War One. They had to pay $33 billion in reparations. They had to accept blame for the war. In addition to that, they had to cut their military down to a very small defensive force of around 100,000 troops. They could not build up any offensive weapons. And as a result, they really did struggle in the aftermath of World War One. Hitler targeted and kind of found a target for blame, kind of a scapegoat, blaming a lot of Germany's problems on Jews and foreign powers, then the Versailles Treaty, of course. He was appointed Chancellor of Germany in 1933. That was after kind of a struggle, maybe for about a decade long period of time. 1924, he tried to assume control of Germany in the Buchenwald Putsch, or rebellion. He was in prison for a period of time. In prison, he wrote the book Mein Kampf, which was means my struggle, about his struggle to take control of Germany. He helped to transform the Weimar Republic into the Third Reich and establish a total dictatorship in Nazi Germany. Nazism is a form of fascism. Germany under Nazi rule, and you can see a lot of the propaganda, the big banners and things like that. Hitler attempted to project kind of this, I guess, tremendous sense of German Nazism and patriotism for the German state, and people really were drawn to his powerful speaking skills. He created a goal of creating a master race of Aryan people who would be considered a pure white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, um, light hair, light eyes, superior to other people. Anti-Semitism, which was prevalent not just in Germany, but had been around for centuries throughout most of all of Europe. Some of the Nazi leaders you should be familiar with would be Dr. Joseph Goebbels. He was the head of Nazi propaganda, or the minister of propaganda. He controlled all communications in Germany. Everything went through his desk. He controlled the media, the newspapers, anything that came out. Everything was pro-Hitler, pro-Nazism, anti-Semitic. He really kept the country lined up on their, I guess, their ideology. To eliminate, I guess, dissent in the country, he went so far as to have big book burning ceremonies to eliminate other ideas from German society, from the minds, kind of purifying the minds, the hearts, and souls of the German people. This is in particular true for the young within Germany, the Hitler Youth. Hitler Youth were put into uniforms, trained and schooled, and almost indoctrinated or brainwashed into believing in Nazism. Heinrich Himmler, one of the more evil people in history, he was the head of the SS, the Nazi secret police. He helped to form death squads known as the Einsatzgruppen. He was in charge of the final solution. So he's the one that really helped to coordinate a lot of what you see with the Holocaust and the concentration camps, things like that. Adolf Eichmann, he helped to help coordinate as well. He was kind of second in command of the Holocaust. He helped to transport Jews from ghettos to the concentration camps. So he was almost in some ways in charge of logistics during this period of time. By logistics, we mean getting the people onto the trains, kind of rounded up. To kind of keep Jews as second class citizens, they established the Nuremberg laws. These were passed in 1935. They said anybody with Jewish blood would be considered a Jew, even if it was like just a fraction of your bloodlines. Further restrictions were placed on further restrictions were placed, and the Jews were persecuted at a more rapid pace. Part of the Nuremberg laws included the idea you had to wear the Star of David on your outer clothing at all times. In addition to that, Jews could not marry non-Jews. Jews could not shop at non-Jewish shops, and vice versa. Non-Jews would not be patronized in Jewish shops. The one event that a lot of people kind of signal as the turning point in terms of stepping up the campaign against Jews would be the Night of Broken Glass or Crystal Knot. This took place in November 1938. This is in response to a German diplomat who was killed in Paris by a Jewish person. As a result, they used it as a justification to kind of crack down on Jewish communities throughout all of Germany. As I mentioned, this marked the beginning of widespread government led violence against Jews. There was no turning back at this point in time. They kind of moved forward quite heavily in regard to anti Jewish campaigns. You can see there the Star of David I alluded to previously. A Jewish registry was created. Anybody of Jewish ancestry had to register with the government. Those Stars of David on the outer clothing, even young children you can see there were forced to wear the Star of David, indicating that they were Jewish. So the Star of David badge everywhere they went, on their jackets, on their outer shirts, things like that. So it could always be identified quite easily in a crowd that you were Jewish. Many Jews were isolated inside ghettos. These were kind of like fenced in areas, kind of areas that were supervised often by Eichmann to make sure that the Jews were, I guess, accounted for at all points in time. The final solution, plan developed in 1942 to eliminate all Jews from Europe. Jewish people from across Europe were taken to concentration camps, and the camps they were used for hard labor or killed. So we look at the different camps. Many could be classified as extermination camps. They were, for example, Auschwitz, the worst of the Nazi death camps, was strictly designed to kill Jews and kill them as rapidly as possible. Some were also a combination of extermination and concentration camps or work camps, where they might actually have them perform tasks for the benefit of Nazi Germany. And then the worst of the I guess the worst aspect of the rounding up of Jews was the work of Dr. Joseph Mengele. He carried out horrific experiments on Jewish people at Auschwitz. These Jews are often experimented with drugs, tested out in terms of what they can stand in terms of extreme conditions. They were submerged in water. They were burned with flames. They had twins where they would separate the twins' body parts and then try and reattach them. So there's a lot of convoluted and sick things that the doctor did to kind of test out German science. Dachau was the very first of the camps. It opened up in 1933. Dachau is a camp that is still around today if you want to see it from a memorial standpoint to kind of see how things operated. Another one was one of the first extermination camps was at Kelmo. This was situated 31 miles north of Ladaz in Poland. Poland had a lot of the camps. In fact, the majority of the camps were in Poland. Following the invasion of Poland in 1939, Germany annexed the area, aiming at its complete Germanization. The camp was set up specifically to carry out the ethnic cleansing through mass killings. Buchenwald was a Nazi camp established at Ettersberg Hill near Weimar, Germany in July 1937. It was one of the first and largest of the concentration camps within Germany in 1937. Many actual or suspected communists were among the very first internees. Bergen-Belsen, this is a Nazi concentration camp in what is today Lower Saxony in northern Germany. This is southwest of the town of Bergen near Chell, originally established as a prisoner of war camp in 1943. Parts of it became a concentration camp. Initially, there was an exchange camp where Jewish hostages were held with the intention of exchanging them for German prisoners of war held overseas. And the disturbing image in the background there, as you can see, unfortunately, is many, many bodies that were kind of just either bulldozed or kind of just dropped into that hole over there. And within that hole, hundreds of dead bodies, just another sad image from this period of time in history. Auschwitz was the most deadly camp in Poland, killed nearly 2 million in total, averaged about 500 killed per hour. You can see some being marched there, most likely to their death. There's some stories, you're probably familiar with the story of Anne Frank. This is another story here of Jewish children who were sheltered and protected during this period of time. Rescue and resistance was not as impactful as you would hope, but it was certainly there. Underground resistance movements were formed to assist the Jews in escaping. The residents of Le Chalon sur Lausanne, the village in the south of France, helped thousands of Jews escape eventually to freedom. One of the more significant of the ghettos, the Warsaw Ghetto in Poland. You can see here there was an uprising on April 19th, 1943. 750 Jews were able to hold off German soldiers to avoid being taken to the concentration camps. Eventually lost the battle, 7,000 were killed, and 56,000 were deported. Nazi SS soldiers during the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. You can see they're armed and ready to kill. Nazi SS soldiers leading deportation of Jews from Warsaw after the uprising. Young children, women, again, a very disturbing sight. The White Rose Resistance Group distributed anti-Nazi pamphlets. You can see that there in the imagery. Led by students Sophie and Hans Scholl. They were caught by German authorities and killed, unfortunately, in 1942. Liberation of the camps. Allied forces reached camps starting in the summer of 1944, but it would take another year or so to finally get them mostly liberated. Soviet forces would liberate Auschwitz as they were moving from the Soviet Union westward in the eastern portion of Europe. American forces liberated Buchenwald and camps in the west portion of Europe. The liberation of the camps, you can see there, the anger on the face of the Jew on the left. Eventually, they held the Nuremberg Trials, where Nazi war criminals were put on trial. As the war ended, many of the top Nazis committed suicide instead of facing a trial. They were cowards on top of everything else. 22 major Nazi criminals were tried for their crimes at Nuremberg. Most claimed to be just following orders from the higher-ups. 12 were sentenced to death. Some escaped to South America. There were stories even throughout the 1950s, 60s, 70s, even into the 80s and 90s of Nazis living in the Amazon rainforest or different parts of, let's say, Brazil or Argentina. And then obviously the effects of the Holocaust. You can see the sheer thousands and in some cases millions of people who died who were of Jewish descent throughout the different countries, including upwards of 90% in Poland, Baltic nations, Germany, and Austria. And then a final lesson reflection as you kind of think through all of this, kind of reflect as to what lessons should be learned from the Holocaust. Mr. Clark is signing off for now. Hopefully you found this disturbing, but at the same point impactful, because this is a very difficult discussion at any point in time to kind of look back on some of the horrors in history.